There's a particular brand of arrogance that only comes from intelligence, unchecked by wisdom. The kind that makes a person believe they're the smartest one in any room they enter. On an otherwise ordinary morning in Providence Municipal Court, that arrogance walked through the doors in a $1,000 suit, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a smirk that would soon be erased forever. This is the story of Michael Grant, a young attorney who mistook legal knowledge for invincibility. It's about the moment he decided to mock, interrupt, and ultimately insult a sitting judge. And it's about Judge Frank Caprio, who demonstrated that in a courtroom, authority isn't negotiable, it's absolute. What unfolded over the next hour wouldn't just end a case. It would end a career, serve as a cautionary tale in law schools across the country, and prove that no amount of expensive education can compensate for a fundamental lack of respect for the law itself. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Providence Municipal Court, casting long shadows across the wooden benches where defendants waited nervously. For most people gathered there, the courthouse represented anxiety. Parking tickets, expired registrations, minor violations that carried more embarrassment than legal jeopardy. At the bench, Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his robe and settled into his chair with the quiet authority of someone who had presided over thousands of cases. His reputation preceded him: fair but firm, compassionate but never foolish. A jurist who understood that municipal court was often where ordinary citizens had their only direct encounter with the justice system. The morning proceeded with its familiar rhythm. Names were called, cases were heard. Some defendants stammered apologies, others attempted humor to deflect from their violations, and a few argued their cases with varying degrees of success. Judge Caprio navigated each case with practiced efficiency, his demeanor steady as a metronome. Then, the clerk reached for the next file, and something shifted in the atmosphere. The gallery seemed to sense it, that inexplicable change in energy that precedes something significant. Judge Caprio glanced at the file, his brow furrowing slightly. Multiple citations, a trail of unpaid fines. Representation entered by counsel. That alone was unusual in a municipal court where most defendants appeared alone or with a nervous family member. "Call the next case," Caprio said evenly. The clerk's voice rang out across the chamber. The heavy doors at the rear of the courtroom creaked open. Into the chamber strode a man who looked like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a corporate boardroom. His suit was impeccably tailored, pressed to perfection. His shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights. A leather briefcase dangled casually from one hand, while the other adjusted the cuffs of a starched shirt. But it wasn't just the appearance. It was the walk, the confidence that bordered on swagger, the arrogance that practically radiated from him as he approached the bench. Behind him shuffled a middle-aged man with thinning hair and calloused hands, his eyes darting nervously to the gallery, as though embarrassed by the spectacle his own attorney was creating. The lawyer, who appeared to be in his early 30s, didn't wait to be acknowledged. He slid his briefcase onto the defense table with theatrical precision, the polished brass clasp gleaming as he snapped it open. His smirk flickered toward the gallery as if to say, "Watch this." Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He had encountered many varieties of arrogance during his decades on the bench, but something about this felt different, sharper, more calculated, more dangerous. The young attorney straightened his tie, tugged at his cuffs again, and leaned casually against the chair, as though the courtroom were merely an audience waiting for his performance to begin. "Good morning, Your Honor," the lawyer said smoothly, his tone coated with a layer of sarcasm, so thin it might have passed for charm if not for the gleam in his eyes. Caprio nodded curtly. "Good morning. And you are?" The lawyer clicked open his case file with dramatic flair. "Attorney Michael Grant, counsel for the defendant, Mr. Russo." The client, An older man who looked like he'd spent his life working with his hands shifted uncomfortably at the sound of his own name. He kept his eyes down, almost embarrassed to be associated with the lawyer standing so proudly beside him. "Mr. Grant," Caprio acknowledged, his tone even. "This court generally hears from defendants directly. But if your client prefers you to speak on his behalf, I'll allow it." Grant smirked. "Oh, I think it's best, Judge. My client isn't well versed in the nuances of law, and I'd hate for him to say something uninformed. That's why I'm here." The words landed with a quiet sting. The implication was clear. He thought everyone else in the room was uninformed, too. Perhaps even the judge himself. A ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. Several people exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. Caprio gave no visible reaction, simply flipping open the case file. "Very well. Your client has multiple citations pending. 2 for speeding, 1 for reckless driving, and several unpaid parking fines. Is that correct?" Grant adjusted his tie again, his grin widening. "We'll get to that, but let's just say the validity of those citations is questionable." Russo, the client, winced and leaned toward his attorney, whispering something urgent under his breath. The lawyer waved him off with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Relax. I've got this." The exchange didn't go unnoticed. Even Judge Caprio's clerk arched an eyebrow, pen hovering over the docket. Grant pulled a folded sheet from his briefcase and smoothed it against the table, looking back up at the bench with an almost predatory gleam. "This is going to be interesting," he murmured, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Judge Caprio studied him in silence, his expression unreadable. The gallery leaned forward instinctively, sensing the storm that was about to break. Judge Caprio lifted the first page of the file, his voice measured and carrying across the room. "Mr. Russo, according to the records before me, you have multiple violations pending. 2 speeding citations, 1 clocked at 41 in a 25-mile-per-hour zone, another at 38 in a school zone. Additionally, a reckless driving charge and 3 unpaid parking tickets." "Your Honor, if I may cut in," Michael Grant interrupted, raising his hand palm out as if halting traffic. "None of those charges should carry weight here today." A ripple of shocked whispers rolled through the benches. Interruptions were rare in Judge Caprio's courtroom, especially ones so blunt and disrespectful. Caprio's eyes flicked upward, studying the lawyer over his glasses. "You may respond when I've finished, Mr. Grant." But Grant only leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice growing louder. "Respectfully, Judge, finishing the list of exaggerated citations won't change the fact that they're fundamentally flawed. If we're wasting time here, I'd rather point that out now." The gallery murmured again, half in disbelief, half in fascinated horror at the audacity. Caprio set the file down with deliberate calm. "All right, Mr. Grant, go on." Grant spread his hands as though lecturing a classroom of first-year law students. "First of all, these speeding citations. The so-called radar guns are notoriously unreliable, if not properly calibrated. Unless the city can produce documentation proving calibration within 30 days of the ticket, those readings are inadmissible. Basic case law." He snapped his fingers for emphasis. His client flinched at the gesture and whispered something urgently. Grant tilted his head down, muttering, "Relax, I know what I'm doing," before straightening again with that same predatory grin. "Secondly," he continued, "the reckless driving charge. Pure fabrication. The officer's report claims my client accelerated dangerously and weaved across lanes. Yet no dashcam footage has been provided. Hearsay at best, exaggeration at worst. If this were a higher court, it wouldn't survive a single motion to dismiss." He paused, clearly savoring the quiet buzz from the spectators. Some even nodded. momentarily impressed by his fluency. "And as for the parking tickets," Grant said, his voice dripping with disdain, "let's be serious. 3 tickets for expired meters? That's not criminal behavior. That's revenue collection. Providence loves to nickel and dime its citizens." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. His words weren't just arrogance now. They were edging into open contempt for the city itself. Russo tugged at his sleeve, whispering desperately, "Mike, please, just settle it." But Grant brushed him off with a hiss. "Trust me." Judge Caprio finally leaned forward, folding his hands. His tone remained calm, but every word carried weight. "You've said quite a bit, Mr. Grant. But let me remind you, this is not a debate hall. This is a court of law, and in this courtroom the rules are not written by you." Grant smiled thinly, tilting his head. "With respect, Judge, rules are written by precedent, and I happen to know them better than most." The gallery stirred again. The arrogance was intoxicating to some, infuriating to others. Caprio did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Very well, Mr. Grant. Present your arguments. I'll give you the floor. But understand this. Every word you say will be weighed not just against the charges, but against your conduct here today." For the first time, Grant's smile wavered. Just for a moment. Then it returned, sharper than before. "Then let's proceed, Your Honor." Michael Grant stood straighter now, one hand on the table, the other gesturing as though arguing before the Supreme Court, rather than a municipal courthouse. "Your Honor," he began, "these citations, every one of them, rest on shaky ground, and I intend to demonstrate exactly why this entire case is nothing more than a waste of time and taxpayer money." He lifted the first citation and waved it like a magician revealing a card. "Speeding in a school zone. Officer claims my client was traveling 38 in a 25. But case law is clear. City of Providence vs. Daniels, 2011. If the signage isn't visible, the ticket cannot stand. I drove that stretch myself last night. The sign is bent, half covered by overgrown branches. Invalid." The gallery buzzed. Some whispered approval. Others expressed disbelief. Russo shifted again. "Mike, please just pay." Grant leaned in quickly, his voice low but sharp. "Relax. I told you we're not paying a dime, trust me. I know exactly how to gut this." Russo hesitated, then nodded uneasily, sinking back into his seat. Grant straightened. "Next, radar accuracy. Courts in Massachusetts, Connecticut, even New York, have all overturned citations when calibration records weren't provided. Unless Providence suddenly believes itself exempt from due process, this one falls apart too." He tapped the paper against the table, smirking at the judge as if daring him to disagree. And then the reckless driving charge, laughable. No dash cam footage, no body cam footage. Only the word of an officer who may or may not have had a clear view. Without corroborating evidence, we're relying on memory. And we all know memory is subjective, unreliable. If this were any higher court, it would never survive a motion to dismiss. He leaned back slightly, one hand slipping into his pocket, exuding casual confidence. But perhaps Providence prefers drama to justice. The words landed heavy. The gallery gasped softly. Even Russo winced, glancing nervously at the judge. Caprio's face didn't change. He simply studied Grant in silence, letting the arrogance build like a balloon ready to burst. "As for the parking tickets," Grant continued, "I'll be blunt. 3 tickets for expired meters is not justice. It's taxation through intimidation. Providence thrives on squeezing its citizens dry, and I, for one, won't let my client be another victim of bureaucratic greed." Whispers swept the benches. A few people actually nodded in agreement, but most shook their heads, amazed at the brazenness. Grant leaned toward Russo again, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that carried just far enough for the first row to overhear. "Don't you see? Even if you'd hit someone, as long as you kept control of the car, they couldn't nail you for murder. Intent matters more than outcome. That's the loophole. That's the game. Rousseau paled, shifting uncomfortably. Mike, that's not right. But Grant cut him off with a dismissive flick of his hand. That's the law. Cold, clear, technical. Don't think about right or wrong. Think about winning. The quiet exchange unsettled those close enough to catch it. A mother in the gallery pressed her lips tight, shaking her head in disgust. Grant, oblivious or uncaring, straightened again. So, to summarize, Your Honor, uncalibrated radar, obscured signage, lack of corroborating evidence, and frivolous municipal taxation. This case is smoke and mirrors. I move to have all charges dismissed. He said it with such finality, such smug assurance, that for a brief moment the courtroom felt suspended in silence. Grant turned back to Judge Caprio, folding his arms across his chest. Well, what say you, Your Honor? The judge leaned forward at last, his hands resting lightly on the bench. His expression remained calm, but something new flickered in his eyes, something sharper, heavier. Mr. Grant, Caprio said softly, his tone edged like a blade. I've heard your arguments, and now you'll hear mine. The room was heavy with silence after Judge Caprio's measured words. Michael Grant shifted, tugging at his cuffs as though he'd just delivered a masterstroke. Mr. Grant, Caprio began, his voice low but deliberate, you have presented your points, but let me remind you, this is a municipal court of law. It does not operate on bravado, clever wordplay, or courtroom theatrics. It operates on facts, precedent, and the truth. Grant leaned forward, his tone sharpening. With respect, Your Honor, truth is often subjective. One officer's claim against my client is not truth. A bent speed sign is not truth. A broken system? Caprio's brows arched. Yes, Grant said, his voice rising. This city bleeds its citizens dry with fabricated charges. You sit there cloaked in authority, but at the end of the day, you're enforcing ordinances designed to trap people. It's legalized theft, Judge, and I won't apologize for saying it. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Rousseau grabbed his sleeve. Mike, stop! But Grant yanked his arm free, his voice booming. No, let me finish. You may intimidate unrepresented defendants with lectures and fines, but not me. I've studied the law. I've practiced it. And I won't be lectured by someone who misuses the bench to play moral arbiter. The courtroom froze. The words hung in the air like a live wire. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. When he spoke, his voice did not rise, but it carried the weight of stone. Mr. Grant, you are standing on very thin ice. I will remind you that this is my courtroom. While you are here, you will show respect to the law, to this chamber, and to the people in it. If you cannot, I will hold you in contempt. Grant gave a short, mocking laugh. Contempt? For telling the truth? For pointing out that this is little more than a revenue machine? Go ahead, Judge. Add that to your record. Punishing a lawyer for defending his client. The gallery stirred, some whispering nervously, others watching in stunned fascination. Caprio leaned forward, his tone sharpening like a blade. Contempt isn't about disagreeing with me, Mr. Grant. It's about arrogance. It's about disrespect. And right now, you are dangerously close to crossing a line that will have consequences far beyond today's hearing. Grant sneered. What consequences? A slap on the wrist. A fine. You don't scare me, Judge. You don't have that kind of power. The courtroom gasped, this time louder. Caprio did not blink. His voice cut through the silence, calm but ironclad. You truly don't know who you're dealing with, do you? Grant faltered for the first time, his smirk twitching at the edges. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, an old man with a gavel. The words escaped before he could stop them. The gallery erupted in a low roar of disbelief. Even Russo sat bolt upright, his eyes wide in horror. "Mike!" Judge Caprio slowly removed his glasses and set them on the bench. His gaze was steady, unyielding. "Mr. Grant, you have insulted this court, demeaned the law, and disrespected the very seat of justice you claim to practice under. I gave you leeway. I gave you the floor, and you chose to abuse it." The judge's voice dropped lower, each word crisp. "Make no mistake. I have the authority to end more than just this case today. I have the authority to end your career." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grant's smirk wavered, his eyes darting briefly to the gallery, then back to the bench. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his posture. Caprio leaned in. "Now sit down and watch very carefully as I show you what true authority looks like." Grant's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. He sat slowly, the confidence bleeding from him in visible cracks. Judge Caprio turned his attention to the man beside the attorney. "Mr. Russo," Caprio said evenly, "this is your case, not Mr. Grant's. So I want to hear from you directly. Do you understand the charges against you?" Russo swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you wish to contest them?" Russo hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Grant, who leaned close and whispered urgently, "Stick to the plan. Say they're bogus." But Russo pulled back, shaking his head. His voice cracked slightly. "Your Honor, I just wanted to settle this. Pay what I owe, if I owe anything. I didn't want all this." He gestured weakly at the tension filling the room. This circus. A ripple of murmurs swept the benches. Grant stiffened. "No, you don't," Russo said, louder this time. "This isn't what I asked for. You insisted on representing me, said you'd make a show of it, that you'd get me off everything." The words echoed in the quiet courtroom. People exchanged knowing looks. Caprio leaned back, his hands steepled. "Mr. Russo, I appreciate your honesty. Let me ask you, do you feel your lawyer's behavior here today has helped your case?" Russo's shoulders slumped. "No, Your Honor. If anything, it's just made things worse." Grant slammed a palm against the table. "That's not true. I've dismantled half the city's evidence already." "Mr. Grant," Caprio cut in sharply, "you will not speak out of turn. I asked your client a question." "Not you." Grant sat back, fuming silently. Caprio returned his gaze to Russo. "You said you simply wanted to resolve the matter. Do you accept responsibility for the violations?" Russo sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yes, Judge. I know I was wrong. I was speeding. I ignored the tickets. I just wanted to clear it up, not turn it into whatever this has become." Caprio nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Russo. That takes courage. Responsibility is the first step toward resolution, and you should know, you have not embarrassed yourself here today. Not at all." Russo's shoulders sagged in relief, but beside him, Michael Grant's face hardened. The cracks in his armor were no longer subtle, they were gaping. Judge Caprio sat in stillness for a long moment, letting the silence weigh heavy on the courtroom. "Mr. Grant," he said at last, "you have mistaken this courtroom for a stage. You have mistaken arrogance for advocacy and insult for strategy. But what troubles me most is that you have done so not to defend your client, but to feed your own ego." Grant straightened, his mouth opening as if to protest, but Caprio raised a hand. "Quiet. You've had your time. Now you will listen." The gallery fell utterly silent. "This court has powers you seem not to respect," Caprio continued. "I can hold you in contempt for your repeated interruptions and disrespect. I can sanction you for misconduct. I can refer you to the Rhode Island Bar Association for disciplinary review. And if I conclude that your conduct undermines the integrity of these proceedings, I can suspend your right to practice in this courtroom until that review is complete." Each phrase landed like a gavel strike. Grant's face drained of color. "Do you understand the gravity of that, Mr. Grant? You walk in here mocking this court, mocking the law, whispering to your client that human life is expendable so long as you can argue intent, and then you expect leniency. You are treading on ground that will collapse beneath you." Grant's eyes widened. He leaned forward quickly, his voice unsteady. "Your Honor, wait. I didn't mean disrespect. If anything, I was passionate, too passionate. I apologize if my tone came off wrong." Caprio's eyes narrowed. "Too passionate?" "Yes, sir," Grant stammered, his hands splayed on the table. "Look, I let my emotions get the better of me. I respect the court. I respect you. I was only trying to protect my client." He turned to Russo. "Right? You know I was only trying to fight for you." Russo shook his head slowly. "You fought for yourself." The lawyer flinched as though the words were a physical blow. "Please, Your Honor," Grant pleaded. "I meant no harm. I was misguided. I see that now." "It won't happen again." The gallery watched, transfixed. Minutes ago, this man had strutted like a predator. Now, he was shrinking, scrambling to claw back dignity from the pit he'd dug himself. But Judge Caprio's expression didn't soften. "An apology offered only after consequences are laid out is no apology at all. It is survival. And survival does not erase misconduct." Grant sank back into his chair, defeated. Caprio adjusted his glasses and straightened the file. "Very well. I've heard enough. Let us move to judgment." Judge Caprio folded his hands, his gaze steady as he looked first at Russo, then at Michael Grant. "Mr. Russo," he began, "you have acknowledged responsibility for your actions. You've admitted to speeding and to ignoring citations. That honesty carries weight with me. For that reason, I am reducing the fines attached to your reckless driving charge and ordering you to attend a driver responsibility course. The unpaid parking citations must be settled in full within 30 days. Do you understand?" Russo nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you." "You may consider your matter resolved," Caprio said. "The court will provide the details at the clerk's desk." Then his eyes turned sharp as steel toward Michael Grant. The gallery hushed. "Now, Mr. Grant," Caprio said, his tone low but commanding, "we come to you." Grant sat straighter, but the bravado was gone. "In all my years on this bench," Caprio continued, "I have seen arrogance. I have seen disrespect. But seldom have I witnessed such a brazen abuse of legal knowledge. Knowledge that should be used to protect the innocent and uphold justice, not to demean the law, mock the court, and poison your client with the idea that life itself can be reduced to a technicality." Grant's throat bobbed. "You interrupted repeatedly. You insulted this court. You implied that human lives on the road are expendable so long as a driver is in control. You mocked ordinances, misrepresented precedent, and turned this chamber into your personal stage. That, Mr. Grant, is misconduct of the highest order." "Your Honor, "Enough!" Caprio cut in sharply. "I gave you more leeway than you deserved. I warned you. You ignored every warning, and now, the consequences." The judge's voice rang across the chamber, firm and final. "This court finds you in contempt. Effective immediately, you are barred from representing clients in Providence Municipal Court, pending a formal review by the Rhode Island Bar Association. Furthermore, this court is forwarding a full transcript of today's proceedings to the bar's disciplinary committee, with my recommendation that your license to practice law be suspended indefinitely." The words crashed through the room like thunder. The gallery erupted into gasps and stunned whispers. Grant's face flushed red, then drained white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. "Your Honor, please," he finally stammered. "You can't—" "I can, and I have," Caprio said. "Arrogance is dangerous enough in a teenager behind the wheel. In an attorney sworn to uphold the law, it is unforgivable." Grant slumped back in his chair, defeated. His polished suit suddenly felt like a costume stripped of power. Judge Caprio lifted his gavel and tapped it once. Case resolved. Michael Grant sat frozen for a long moment after the ruling, his hands limp on the table. The polished veneer that had carried him into the courtroom was gone. Finally, he pushed back from the chair with a sharp scrape that echoed across the chamber. He gathered his briefcase, fumbling with the latch. Without a word, he turned and walked down the aisle. The smirk that had once commanded attention was gone. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his steps hurried. As he passed the benches, whispers followed him. Some pitying, most not. A few spectators shook their heads. Others exchanged looks that said it all. Arrogance had finally met its match. The heavy doors shut behind him with a thud. At the defense table, Russo remained seated, staring down at his hands. When he finally looked up at Judge Caprio, his eyes were wet with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. I didn't want any of this. You treated me fairly. I appreciate it." Caprio gave him a nod, his tone softer now. "Take responsibility, Mr. Russo. Learn from it. That's all the law asks." Russo nodded, almost bowing before stepping away from the table. As he walked toward the clerk's desk, people in the gallery gave him small nods of encouragement. Unlike the lawyer, who had strutted in with him, Russo left with something intact: his dignity. The chamber hummed with whispers now, like a hive stirred to life. Through it all, Judge Caprio remained composed. He adjusted his robe, glanced at the next case file, and spoke as if nothing unusual had just transpired. "Next case," he said evenly. The rhythm of the court resumed, steady and familiar. But the gallery still buzzed, people replaying the moment in hushed tones. For them, this would not be just another morning at Providence Municipal Court. It was the day Arrogance walked in, wearing a $1,000 suit, and left with nothing at all. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Michael Grant's courtroom destruction spread through the Rhode Island legal community like wildfire. The transcript was reviewed by the Bar Association's disciplinary committee, and after a formal hearing, his license to practice law was indeed suspended, not indefinitely, as Judge Caprio had recommended, but for 2 years, with mandatory ethics training required before reinstatement. The case became a teaching tool in law schools across New England. Professors used it to illustrate not just courtroom decorum, but the fundamental principle that legal knowledge without ethical grounding is not just useless, it's dangerous. Intelligence without humility is arrogance, one legal ethics professor told her students while showing the transcript. And arrogance in a courtroom isn't just disrespectful, it's professional suicide. Michael Grant never returned to practice law with the same confidence. When his suspension ended, he took a position doing document review at a small firm, far from any courtroom. The $1,000 suits remained in his closet, unworn. Mr. Russo, on the other hand, completed his driver responsibility course, paid his fines, and never received another citation. Years later, when asked about that morning in court, he said simply, "I learned that taking responsibility is easier than making excuses. I wish my lawyer had learned that too." And Judge Frank Caprio? He continued presiding over his courtroom with the same steady authority, treating each defendant with the fairness and dignity they deserved, while never, not once, allowing arrogance to go unchecked. Because in his courtroom, the law wasn't about who had the most expensive suit or the cleverest argument. It was about justice, accountability, and the simple truth that no one, no matter how educated, how confident, or how well-dressed, is above respect for the system that governs us all. The lesson was clear. Walk into a courtroom with humility, or be prepared to walk out with nothing.